Right, so here we're going to look at the concentration differences across cell membranes, but we're going to be talking about ion channels and transporters as well as the sodium potassium pump. Okay, so when we look at ion channels and transporters here, we're going to be talking about two different types of movement across the cell. All right, we're going to be talking about uh, the passive diffusion, all right, and secondary active transport. So passive diffusion, here's where we have specific ion channels that are going to allow ions to move along their concentration gradients. They don't require any energy or ATP. They move along a concentration gradient. So that means that they move from high concentration to low concentration. All right, so some examples of this would be potassium leak channels. These are channels that allow potassium to just leak out of the cell, move out of the cell, and that helps contribute to that resting membrane potential of the cell. That resting membrane potential of a cell is important for cellular function. So if it's something like beating the heart or causing a muscle contraction. All right. Now we also have secondary active transport. Secondary active transport, this is where we utilize energy that's stored in what we would say are existing ion gradients that help transport other solutes. All right. So here what you're seeing right here is secondary active transport. All right. Secondary active transport, you have ions moving from one side to the other. All right, that kind of creates a little bit of energy. And when we create a little bit of energy, that helps to pull that that ion or that substance from one side of the cell to the other. All right, so it's using the energy that is being created by another structure going through the membrane. All right, and we'll kind of go into more detail about this when we get to more in-depth explanation. All right, and then we have sodium potassium pump, which you see here on the right. That's considered active transport. And when we talk about active transport, that means that it actively needs help getting from one side of the membrane to the other. All right, because what's happening is we're moving against the concentration gradient, and that's going to require energy in the form of ATP. And the way the mechanism works is that we're going to have 3 sodium ions that will be pumped out of the cell into the extracellular fluid, and then we're going to have 2 potassium ions that are going to be brought into the cell. Okay, now the whole purpose of this is to make sure that we have that high concentration of sodium on the outside and the high concentration of potassium on the inside of the cell. All right, that gradient's important for creating that resting membrane potential that we were talking about. All right, so it kind of powers that secondary active transport. All right, let's see what else we have here. Okay, so a couple of the functions here, it's going to power that secondary active transport. We also can support nerve impulse transmission. Okay, so that's how neurons can send signals throughout the body, as well as muscle contraction. All right, and the whole clinical relevance of that resting membrane potential, these ion channels and the sodium potassium pump, these are important for maintaining the voltage difference across the membrane. All right, this is what allows for those cells like neurons and muscle fibers to get excited and do what it is that they do, whether it's spreading an action potential or muscle contraction. All right, what we can see when things don't work right, when there's a problem with these channels or dysfunction in these channels, we can see that there are certain disease processes that occur. So, for example, if there's a dysfunction in sodium potassium pump, we're going to see conditions like muscle weakness or paralysis or arrhythmias, because this is important for muscle contraction. As far as another way that we look at this as clinically relevant is when we have drugs or therapeutic targets, we can use drugs to help treat pathologies. So, for example, let's look at the sodium potassium pump again. there's a drug called digoxin. Digoxin is important because it inhibits this sodium potassium pump, and we use this to treat heart failure. And what we're doing is we're increasing the intracellular calcium, which helps us have contractions that squeeze a little bit harder. Okay, so by inhibiting these pumps, it allows us to build up that extra calcium so we can enhance that contraction in the heart.